Hi, it's Pastor Tart again, and today we're going to be talking about a new section of our catechism, the means of grace, that is, the two sacraments of the Lutheran Church, sacrament of baptism and the sacrament of communion. We'll talk about that, but before I get into that, I'd like to just talk to you about why I am wearing this collar. This is called a clerical shirt, a collar, and pastors will sometimes wear these shirts because it's a sign of being a servant. The collar is really a collar of a slave or a servant. And so whenever you see a pastor wearing a collar, it's not a sign of status, but it's really a sign that that pastor is serving the gospel. And that's why I usually wear a collared shirt whenever I'm leading worship, to remind myself and to remind the people that I am here as a servant of the gospel. And one of the ways in which pastors serve the congregations of people is through the giving or administering of the sacraments. So what, first of all, in the first lesson, what is a sacrament? And the sacraments sometimes can be seen, I talk about this in the video scribe, as a sacred moment. A sacrament is a visible sign of God's promises, God's grace. But the thing I really want to push you on, one thing I really want you to think about, is that sacraments, that is, in the Lutheran Church we have two, baptism and communion. Sacraments are ways in which you and I can experience the gospel. I mean, we have said wonderful things about God in prayer. We've said wonderful things about what God is like in the creed. But how do you really experience that? And God gives us the sacraments, these visible things, things we can touch, things we can smell, things that we can hear, things that we can experience, so that God's word is not some kind of head thing. It's not some kind of heart thing, but it is an experience, a way in which you and I can know that God's word is for us, for you. Okay, what am I talking about? Well, let's take baptism. The visible sign in baptism is, of course, water, and we will talk about this more in the next few sessions. But think about it. How do you really know? How do you really know that you're a Christian? How do you know, like I'm going to talk about, how you belong, how you're forgiven, that you have new life? How do you know that? You can say, well, I believe it, I trust it. But think about it. That when you come into a sanctuary and you see a baptismal font, you see a place where babies and adults are baptized, given the water, you can say, that happened to me. I experienced that. I can see the water. I can feel the water. I can touch the water. I know that in that water, God made a promise to me, a word of promise to me that I am part of God's family. And so the water of baptism, and again, we're going to talk about this more and more, becomes a concrete, physical experience for us, that whenever we have water in our lives, whether it's taking a shower or swimming or drinking it after a long hard day in the exercising or working, we know that God is like that. God's word is like that. Same thing with communion. We have bread. We have wine. Visible things. Things we can eat. Things that we can smell. Things that we can touch. touch. And again, we'll talk about this more when we get into the Lord's Supper. That in that meal, we can experience God's great welcome, God's great inclusion, God being with us, God loving us, God becoming part of our lives. It becomes a real experience, not a head thing, not something I feel, but something I hold, something given to me with the words, given and shed for you. Wow. Sacraments, sacred moments, visible elements with the promise attached, however you want to define it, are part of our lives. Given to us by Jesus. From Jesus. That's how Lutherans define sacraments. And like in the Catholic Church, they've got 7. Some churches don't have sacraments. But in the Lutheran Church, we have come to understand these sacred moments are how we experience God's grace and God's love. That they're not just something we talk about, but part of our spiritual life and experience of God's love. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about that in the sessions to come. But know this, they need to be a part of your life. Every day we remember our baptism. Every time we worship, we remember this great supper of Jesus, where he comes to be with us and grace us with grace and forgiveness and new life. So I hope you enjoy the next sessions. They're some of my favorite things to talk about, if you can't tell that already. Because I am sure that once you really hear it, and once you really know it, baptism, the Lord's Supper, communion, will become some of the most joyous, fabulous experiences in your spiritual life. Keep the faith.